I was invited during the time that I was there to participate in two really exciting projects at the University of Wisconsin. One was the Washington Irving Project. My major professor, Henry Pachman, had become the editor of the Washington Irving papers. And the Modern Language Association was in the process of printing scholarly editions of American writers. And so Professor Pachman asked me if I would be interested in editing Washington Irving's The Adventures of Captain Bonneville, who was one of the early explorers in the West, and after whom Lake Bonneville in Utah is named. So I started doing that. I started editing that volume, and that was great fun to be part of a project that involved a lot of top scholars from around the country. And I was also invited to participate in something called the Articulated Instructional Media Program. A couple of people that I knew at Wisconsin who were on the staff had applied for and gotten a grant from the Carnegie Foundation to study ways in which a university might be made portable, might be made more adaptable. This was really early in finding experimental ways of educating people. And so I was named executive secretary of that, which was really good because it was I was getting $8,000 a year, which in those days was really a lot of money for a graduate student. And that gave us some freedom as a family. But as executive secretary of the Articulated Instructional Media Program, my task was to work with the faculty in developing courses that could make the university portable. So we could, or to make it more adaptable to media. So we worked with the Russian department to get a course in Introduction to Russian History that could be taught to students in a large classroom without the teacher being present. That is, it could be replicated because it was on tape and film. We got the psychology department to develop a film of the Introduction to Psychology. We got a course in botany. We did a number of things that in those days were really quite far-reaching and experimental. And the great thing about that experience is that it introduced me to being an innovative educator. I've always been, or since in my professional career, I've been what I call an educational entrepreneur. Always looking at ways to change the paradigm, looking at ways to find better ways of teaching, better ways of making the university portable. And I can remember one experience we had where a man was taking a course, I can't remember what, maybe it was in chemistry, and he got it up to, he was doing really well. He took 3/4 of the course and then he just stopped. And we kept sending him letters saying, you need to come back and finish this course. And he said, look, you don't understand. I had a problem. I had to learn enough to know how to solve the problem. Your course gave me that knowledge. I solved the problem and now I'm doing something else. But it was exciting to be making the university portable and to make it more adaptable to technology. So it came time to look for jobs. I went to the Modern Language Association. I had interviews with University of North Carolina and Boston University, University of California at Irvine, San Francisco State University, a number of universities. That included UCLA. And then went home and waited for job offers. And when they came through, it was really, in a sense, not hard to choose UCLA because it was going home, going back to Southern California. And Ruth and I both knew that UCLA was really a great university and it would really be fun to be back home where our families were and to go and to be teaching at such a university. Ruth was, by this time she was pregnant with Juliana, our third child. She was taking final exams as she was having contractions. So Juliana was born in May of that year that we finished graduate school. Ruth had not finished her coursework. but I was finishing mine. I had finished my dissertation, and so we took the job at UCLA and finished at Wisconsin and headed west. We bought a Volkswagen bus and headed west to Oregon to see my parents, and then came on down to Los Angeles and stayed with Ruth's parents for a while, and then went over to find an apartment close to UCLA. And in the fall of 1966, began my teaching career at at UCLA, and Ruth continued to study, but by that time we had 3 children. And then we had a couple of years after that, 1968, Maddox, our 4th child, was born. Ruth was then fully engaged in being a mother and a housewife. I was fully engaged in trying to learn how to be a teacher. I loved that experience again. It was frightening to me that I had, University of California selects the upper 12.5% of the graduating students from California high school. So I knew I had the cream of the crop, and I couldn't do the "what do you know, Miss Brown" excuse again for not knowing. So I had to work very hard, but it was fun and it was challenging. I think that it was also in some ways eye-opening that this was a university that put a premium on publishing. And even though I had published, and even though I was working in the Washington Irving project and was working in the Mark Twain papers at Berkeley, I found that my thirst for teaching was greater than my thirst for scholarship. I liked scholarship and found it kind of interesting, but I didn't have nearly the passion for it. And partly, I think that was partly because I didn't feel really like I was a scholar. In spite of my training at Wisconsin, and in spite of the fact that I had scholarships and fellowships and all of that, I didn't quite feel like I had what it took to be a scholar. But I did know that I had what it took to be a teacher. And so I began seriously studying and preparing, sometimes over-preparing. But it was great fun to begin my teaching career at a place like Wisconsin. I remember after the first semester realizing that my students didn't know prosody, and I didn't really know it either. That is to iambic pentameter and stanza form and all of that. So I decided that I really had to learn that, but I also wanted to make it possible for my students to learn it. So I went to the chair of the department, Brad Booth, and I said, "Brad, I'd like to spend the summer developing a self-learning segment on prosody that we could put in the English language reading room, and any student could go in and just do it, learn it, and wouldn't have to have a professor's time. What do you think of that?" He said, "It's a great idea, Bob," but he said, "the faculty will say, why is Rees fiddling around with the audiovisual aids when he should be doing scholarship?" And I realized then that, in a way, I was in a different place than I thought I would be. That the premium on scholarship, as opposed to teaching, and it sometimes was clearly at the expense. I remember one of my colleagues getting a job, being offered a position at the University of Virginia, which was a great school too. And he came back excited. He said, "The great thing about it is for the first 2 years, I don't have to teach any students." I thought, gee, that's not the kind of job I would be interested in. Or another of my colleagues who got D's on his student evaluations, but he was offered a prestigious position at the University of New Hampshire. So clearly I was caught in a way between what the university was expecting of me and where my passion lay. And so that was the beginning of what was for me a kind of wrenching experience at the end of 7 years when I did not get tenure and was devastated by that because I was doing all of the things that I thought would lead to tenure. I was publishing, after all, one of the Washington Irving projects. I was working on in the Mark Twain papers. I'd published some other papers. I had others in the way, but I missed getting tenure by one vote. And I remember the department chair saying to me, "Bob, I feel bad because in previous cases I felt bad for the individual. In your case, I feel bad for the university that we are not retaining you." And that was one of the best compliments that I think has ever been paid to me. So that continued my involvement in teaching at UCLA. I also was involved in teaching at church and enjoyed that. Ruth was directing the Institute Choir, which was great fun. And we had moved into a neighborhood, Cheviot Hills. That was one of the best places we've ever lived. We borrowed enough money to buy our first house and kind of settled into, to be university-centered people.